What's going on, everyone? Kellen Reck here, and today we're going to do a quick VFX breakdown from Stranger Things. We're going to look particularly at seasons 1 and 2, so no spoilers for season 3, and we're just going to look at some of the things that they did to create various effects throughout those 2 seasons. So let's dive in, let's check it out. Alright, so the first thing we've got here is we're going to look at the Demogorgon and its progression over the years. They did the Demogorgon in a number of different ways, so let's just see here. This is one of the final scenes from season 1. Obviously, Elle here is using her powers, and she's sort of breaking the Demogorgon into this ash. Now, what do they do in this scene? Well, it looks like basically they just have a digital recreation of this monster, or a digital creation of this monster, 3D creation, and then they're using a particle effect to use the powers to basically turn the creation into a bunch of particles that scatter about the room, and then they have lighting effects and everything to make the lights go on and off. Basically similar to the particle effect that they use in the Upside Down to create those spores, they're recreating here. So you can see this breakdown now. The room itself, this is your clean shot. They've got a rough little dent on the chalkboard, and then the metal here is broken and everything. And then what they do is they layer in these effects. What really adds to this is this layer here. This is creating a bit of a diffusion, so it almost shows like an energy field that's happening as she's using this power. Without that, you don't quite get the same feel. This feels very rough, very almost too crisp to be real. So by adding that diffusion right there, you can see a nice energy field. And then you add in your monster, your particles, you blur them a little, add some motion blur, and that's where you have this effect. What's funny as we jump into this next clip is you can see what they did a lot in season 1 was attempt to use practicals. So they're using a lot of practical effects in this early season. Number 1, because you're saving money. Number 2, because it's just a little bit easier once you have your costumes made. So a lot of these scenes that use the Demogorgon, it's actually a real person in a suit. So look at this. That's a real costume with a person in it. You can see there's green screen effects on the arms and on the back here. This is a real person, and then they digitally add in the head so that they can basically remove the person's face and have the flaps of the flower, or whatever you want to call it, on the face open up digitally. And you can see, look, in this shot, there's the person. This is the look of the costume, person's face right there. And then they can digitally remove him, add the teeth, do all that. And this is a photo of that costume. So this was a real stunt actor in a suit. Obviously, these green screen elements, you can see his real hands are right here, holding on to handles that make the arms move about. They can remove those green screen elements, remove his face, and then you digitally can play with the flower face here. So this was good for season 1, again, because you're saving money, but it's also giving the actors a sense of the size, the scale, the movements of this creature so that they know what they're dealing with. Because later on in the season, and in season 2, these monsters are digitally created, so the actors need to have a sense of what they're dealing with. By having this practical effect early in the season, they can get a sense of the movement, the size, everything about this creature, and it gives them a nice sense of frame, what they're dealing with, and it can help them really get into the scene. You can see later in season 1, season 2, we start to have these digitally added monsters, just 3D builds, add your lighting effects, add them into the scene. Now, this is season 2, so what's interesting about season 2 is that the monster is a demodog now, so it's less of a humanoid creation. That's going to make it harder to do practically, so they have to build these digitally. Now, you can see here there's a progression of size of the monster, like it starts as a little slug thing and then turns kind of into a dog. So you can see that progression here, and this is obviously all digitally created, so they build it out and then they can add it into whatever scene. Now, let's go back real quick. If we really break down this scene here, this is where the monster's basically coming into dog form. They did a really good job on most of these. I have some slight issues with this scene in particular. I feel like the light is a little bit harsh on it. Obviously, you have these highlights on the side that give it a look of sliminess. But my only problem here, and this is basically because it's not a real effect, is you're not getting a lot of movement of the leaves below it. So if you look, there's not, like on this big leaf here, there's no crunching, there's no real motion. If someone were actually moving, the leaves in this whole area would feel that weight and move around a little bit. There's not a shifting of the leaves. They did a great job with the shadows and everything. You would think there might be a little, if it's actually slimy, you might get a little reflection of trees or other sticks behind it. You don't get too much of that. You get some shadowing, but not a full reflection. That's the only adjustment I would maybe make here, but otherwise it looks really good, and you start to get that nice realistic digital creation, which they did a good job with. What they would do is actually 3D print models of these smaller versions of the monster. Why they did this is because, like in season 1 with the practical costume, they wanted to give the actors a sense of scale and weight. So they printed out these little models so that the actors could get a sense of what they're dealing with, and then they would make adjustments and remove them. You can see the 3D prints of the little slug-like version, little dart from season 2. You can see that, so the actors have a sense of what they're dealing with. And they would use that in scenes like this, where there's a lot of motion, and then they can add digital movements to it. So in that scene in particular, they did use a 3D print of Dart. They can have him fiddling with it in his hands, and then they can add in some motion later. So the next thing that I want to look at is the spores that they use in the Upside Down. That's at least what they call them. You might refer to them as the dust of the Upside Down, or whatever the little floating things are in the Upside Down. So look at this shot here. This is just early on, before and after scene. Obviously, in the after, there's a lot more spores. You can still see a little bit in the initial shot. These are just these particles here and there. So in season 1, they did use a little bit of practical effects with these, not much, and then they add in an overlay of these particles. Season 1, I want to say it was just a basic overlay, kind of like a snow pass that you might use. You can get that in After Effects or something. They just basically toss it over. I'm sure they use a little bit of adjustments on that, but the initial effect in season 1, I'm pretty sure was just a basic overlay effect. Season 2, they went a little bit more intricate with the spores because they have a lot of technical scenes in the Upside Down. So what you can see in season 2 is that these spores are actually interacting really well with the light on the flashlight. They're lighting up. You can see where there's light, they light up well. Where there's dark, they don't. It's more than just a generic overlay of like a snow pass filter or something like that. See, as it's passing, as the camera passes through the scene, these foreground spores are out of focus, and then they become in focus as the camera hits them in focus. That's a technical usage of these spores. That's not just one quick overlay over the entire scene, which is what I initially thought they were doing for this. It requires a lot more work than that. So the VFX artists have actually done some mock-ups of what they do here, which was interesting to me. I didn't necessarily realize how technical these spores were. What they do is they rotoscope out the various parts of the scene. So you have your foreground, you have your background, and then they place the spores in, as I was saying, in Z-space and have them interact with the various elements of the scene. So the spores aren't just going to fly into a character. They'll float around a character. They will come in and out of focus. They'll interact with light. So it's a much more technical usage of these spores. And that's not so much the case in season 1, but in season 2, you do see that a lot more. Season 1, they were not quite as interactive. So next we're going to look at the big climactic scene in season 2, where Elle is using her powers to close down the gate. This scene is interesting. There's a lot of digital effects going on. And again, for a show that in a lot of ways likes to use practical effects, this scene does not apply. Obviously, you have your spores all in the scene. You have a huge VFX wall in the background. The only thing practical in the scene is going to have to be the cage itself and our actors. The Demogorgon, Demodogs, as we learned, are not real in the scene. Pretty much nothing is real besides the actors and this cage. So what's going on is, if you look here at this breakdown, you've actually got a blue screen around the actors in the cage. You've got lights that are shooting right at them, and that recreates the light from the gate. And then you've got fans blowing wind into their face so that their hair is going back. There's that motion. And then what you do is you remove all that, so it really is only the cage and the actors, and you build out everything digitally. Everything in the scene created digitally. So you have 3D creations of the webbing that is from the Upside Down. Then you're adding a light particle effect of the actual gate itself. You're adding glows. You want to, you can still see the blue reflection from the initial shot from the blue screen. They do a great job of coloring that out. These lights aren't even real, so this light is actually here, but they digitally add the glow, and all of these particle effects are recreated. Something they do a lot of in Stranger Things is these almost vein creations on faces to show when power is being used, eye effects and everything. So these eyes are digitally done, and then what they do is they create these little markers around the eyes. What you can do is then create tracking points, so they can add these digital veins that are going to grow. They toss them onto these markers, so when she moves, the veins go with them, and then they can digitally have basically anything happen to the face, and it's all tracked to those marker points. And you can see they do that here with Will. They create a 3D model of his face, and they add whatever vein effect they want, and then because they have these tracker points on his face, they can throw that 3D creation right on top of his face, and it moves within the scene. Oh, you know what? I love this shot. Circling around him, and they're cutting in and out of his mindset, which is the monster coming in and out of him. Wow, look at this. Look how they did this. Now this I was not aware of. So they have a circular dolly with fans shooting right at his face, a camera, and behind him is a green screen. So what they can do, you can see it. What they can do is cut out everything behind him. So you're not going to see any of the other cameras or anything, any of the background. They take out the whole background, but they have this shot that circles totally around him, and they can add that effect in. Now, how do they do it when they have the actors? Is they're just going to have the dolly shot without the green screen. So if you could see down here, you'd see that dolly track that's circling around him. And then it's all VFX using the green screen to key it out. That's pretty sweet. So this is the last scene we're going to look at. This is the final scene from season 2. So the camera's going, oh, wow. The camera goes all the way around, flips to the Upside Down, and you have your effects, and everything's reversed. Wow. And then the monster appears over top. Great use of music, too. So let's just think about this. The camera starts upright, your music's playing normal, then you use an EQ to basically cut out the highs of the music. You just have that low, echoey sound of the music, and then comes in the lightning and horrifying sounds. Music and sound effects done very well here, but the shot itself is what's magical. So you have basically a camera flying backwards in Z-space and rotating, and then it rotates underground. So the underground, this little transition here is just a basic transition, but it looks like you have 2 shots and then one. So it's the same shot twice. This one comes back rotating 90 degrees. This one continues to fly backwards. So it's not the same shot. They're both moving backwards. This one's closer than the next. So this one flies backwards, rotates 90 degrees. This one flies backwards and rotates back 90 degrees, but everything's flipped. So they must rotate the same direction, and then they rotate back the same direction. This shot is just flipped afterwards because you get the lettering in reverse and everything's sort of upside down. Oh, look at this. Okay, ready? Look at this. So you've got your school. There's 2 cameras. So the first camera jumps back, rotates. The second camera meets at the exact same point, continues to come back, rotates back up. Okay, so this second camera starts sideways, rotates back up, and finishes. Look at this from overhead. So it is consistently coming back, and then what they do is they flop this shot so that it looks like it's rotating back the other way, and it's totally upside down. That's how you have it. 2 cameras. First one comes back, rotates. Second one comes back, rotates back to its original upright position, and then they flip it in post. Incredible shot, incredible creation. I know that my analysis of that was very confusing, but this breakdown here shows exactly what's happening. It's two different cameras that both come back and rotate, and the second camera is flipped in post so that everything in the scene, the school, and everything else is in reverse because you're in the upside down. And of course, then they add their digital effects. That's incredible. Okay, that's my breakdown of Stranger Things VFX. I hope you enjoyed. We will be back with more very soon. Thanks for checking it out. Like the video if you did. Leave some comments down below. Subscribe if you've been enjoying these videos, and we'll check you back in the next one.